Visual art has been an element of human society for thousands of years, and for almost as long so has the censorship of it.
One only needs to look to ancient Egypt to find the practice of damnatio memoriae, where disgraced pharaohs would have their monuments and histories destroyed by their successors, which was approved by their Senate.
The human desire to tear down voices of opposition has been a time-honored practice throughout the years, and visual art has been a major target. This still holds true today in America, with even major art installations being canceled or restricted because of public pressure or government interference. How can this happen? How can a society allow their artists and their voices to be suppressed by others, especially in America where freedom of speech is revered as a founding principle? And what can us lay people do to help artists in times of censorship? Before we get into that, I feel like I should explain why visual art specifically. Art historian and scholar David Friedberg has noted the immense psychological power that visual images hold. People are sexually aroused by pictures and sculptures. They break pictures and sculptures. They mutilate them, kiss them, cry before them, and go on journeys to them. They're calmed by them, stirred by them, and incited to revolt. They give thanks by means of them, expect to be elevated by them, and are moved to the highest levels of empathy and fear. They've always responded in these ways. They still do. Art is individually moving, but it also reflects upon the society in which it's created. It shows what a society's subjects endorse, what they oppose, what they're aware of, and it can also spread knowledge. Art allows people a glimpse into other worldviews and experiences that they otherwise would have fought against. Friedberg says that the fact art is censored proves that it's powerful as well. In his book Censorship: A Beginner's Guide, author Julian Petley says that undoubtedly, the most effective way of censoring someone whose views one does not wish to be heard is to kill them, or failing that, to frighten them into silence. Petley begins the main contents of his book with this statement, probably because it's the most undeniable form of censorship someone has in their arsenal. And murdering or intimidating an artist into silence usually works. How can an artist defy you if they're dead? How can art defy you if it's been killed? Barnett Newman was an American abstract expressionist painter. For 40 years, he developed an increasingly minimalist style, culminating in a series of paintings Who's Afraid of Red, Yellow, and Blue. 4 massive, imposing pieces, the smallest of the bunch being nearly 3,600 square inches. They might not seem like much. They're 3 primary colors, usually with one main color as the focus, with accent lines, or zips, as Newman called them. But despite how misleadingly simple they appear, 2 of these pieces were vandalized. The third in the series was carved by a man with a box cutter. The fourth, and the last of Newman's major works, was tagged by a student who thought it was a perversion of the German flag. Newman had painted these works as an expression of freedom, initially without even a clear purpose or subject. Both of the pieces underwent restoration efforts, but critics and onlookers say that a certain quality was lost. The paintings were permanently tainted. When art is killed, the assailant sends a clear signal that if other artists try to share a similar message, they might also be put at risk. This discourages others from speaking out and from taking part in creation and experiencing recognition. And this censorship doesn't just come from lone individuals either, but it can also come from people in power. In his 2019 video, Who's Afraid of Modern Art?, essayist Jacob Geller recounts the backlash faced not only by Barnett Newman, but also American photographer Robert Mapplethorpe. Mapplethorpe, from the late 60s to 80s, captured celebrity portraits, still lifes, LGBT subcultures, and BDSM. The latter 2 subjects drew the ire of North Carolina Senator Jesse Helms. Helms, according to Geller, was
enamored with preserving the distinction between true art and deviance.
This manifested into a lot of speeches about the production of disgusting, insulting, revolting garbage by obviously sick minds, and how ridiculous it was that federal grants paid for its creation. Helms might not have outright restricted Mapplethorpe's posthumous exhibits, but he used public outrage as a proxy to pressure curators to cancel their showings of his photography. Mapplethorpe, having passed away due to AIDS complications in 1989, couldn't advocate for himself or his work. Those who knew him were unable to bring back the showings. The destruction of art and the artists behind it limits what kinds of things artists are considered allowed to say. Geller likens this treatment to Nazi Germany and what they refer to as degenerate art.
People from ethnic, gender, or sexual minorities had their art ridiculed and devalued in public settings, which made it very clear whose voices were being listened to. This is because the art that they made didn't fit into the glorified history that the Nazis wanted to create in the minds of their subjects. It promoted lifestyles and ideas that the party deemed unacceptable.
There are those in America who believe that some art should be hidden. Groups like the American Family Association supported the cancellation of the Robert Mapplethorpe exhibit, citing sensational presentation of potentially obscene material. And Helms took a lot of average Americans and made them suddenly care a lot about photography they'd probably never seen before. But the vitriol that Mapplethorpe's work faced was taken by conservative politicians and targeted at the National Endowment for the Arts, a federal agency that funds arts education. It's the largest supporter of the arts in the US, and it provides underprivileged communities access to art and the supplies needed to create and share it.
Mapplethorpe was just the catalyst for government officials to go after their much wider target of the NEA and funding for defiant art in general. Which leads us to another of Petley's listed methods of censorship is the manipulation of markets. In this section, he mostly takes an interest in television and how the regulation and deregulation of television impacted content and the sharing of information. He says that
media diversity is a structural and systemic safeguard,
but that as media has become a commodity rather than a utility,
the production of knowledge becomes a basic industry like the production of oil, steel, and transportation.
Media companies get to have a monopoly over what their viewers are allowed to see.
Petley's primary example of this is Rupert Murdoch, his vast control over many news companies, and his financial ability and incentive to shut down lesser news stations. Murdoch is incredibly wealthy and can slash his prices to a level that smaller companies couldn't afford, which can lead to them going out of business and leaving his as the last one standing. At this point, he's free to push his stations to promote certain ideologies he supports, like when papers owned by Murdoch conveniently complained about how little the BBC, a competing company, had to pay in licensing fees and purported political bias. The establishment of large monopolies on creative works affects those in the US and abroad as well.
The creative application distributor Adobe is notorious for its attempts to kill smaller companies, acquire them, and then let their services bleed out until they're made unusable. They did it to Flash Player, and they just did it again to Adobe Animate. Barely any software Adobe sells its users are actually Adobe-made products. They're mostly stuff that they just bought and now sell with a higher price tag because they're one of few companies that give users access to these kinds of creative tools. This system prohibits some creatives from being able to express themselves because they lack access to the tools they need, tools that are considered industry standard.
The only reason I was able to make this project is because a professor at my college offered to give me Adobe's Creative Suite for free, out of the kindness of her heart. Thank you, Ms.
Television networks in America are also prone to becoming huge conglomerates, which can negatively affect the experience of their consumers and those who want to broadcast on their services. Currently, Paramount, which owns all of these companies, is trying to buy Warner Brothers Discovery, which owns all these companies, for $100 billion. It's been made almost necessary at this point for companies to try to just become one big company, so then they can do whatever they want. They can control what people see on TV and what people know about and what they're allowed to think. Paramount owns CBS News, and its CEO, David Ellison, has already promised to the president that he'll make CBS and CNN more friendly towards him and his ideology. No, really, he just said it.
In a recent visit to the White House, Paramount CEO David Ellison promised President Trump that he would completely rehaul CNN if the president allowed them to purchase Warner Brothers Discovery. Trump and Larry Ellison already met last month to discuss firing CNN hosts Aaron Burnett and Brianna Keilar, both of whom Trump has issues with, and putting CBS's 60 Minutes on CNN if Ellison were to acquire Warner. Both Ellisons are vocal Trump supporters with a right-wing media empire to go with it, having already acquired CBS and the Free Press, and having bought TikTok under U.S. ownership to push pro-Israel views.
This is just blatant interference with news stations for political propaganda purposes. And interfering with art and media like this can seriously damage how an audience perceives a piece, and it'll damage their trust in it because they'll wonder how much of it was really the artist's intention and how much of it was due to corporate meddling and changes.
David Lynch's classic television show Twin Peaks is based on the premise of a teen girl being murdered and looking for who did it. The tagline of the show was, "Who killed Laura Palmer?" But Lynch didn't really intend for there to be an answer given to audiences. This was just an inciting incident to display the weird, horrifying happenings of small rural towns in America. As the series entered its second season, though, ratings began to dwindle ever so slightly. Network executives at ABC began to pressure Lynch to reveal the killer to prevent ratings from dropping any further. Not that Twin Peaks wasn't popular, its least viewed episode of season 1 was still seen by 15 million people, and it was a cultural phenomenon, but the pressure was on to keep that momentum going by any means necessary. After intense pressure, Lynch conceded, and the episode Lonely Souls revealed Laura Palmer's killer in a truly shocking and gripping scene. Like, I can say personally that the ending of this episode left me in a daze for the rest of the night after seeing it.
But that wasn't really how the show was supposed to go, was it? Lynch and his cohorts had a specific vision in mind, and economic-driven forces changed them and stifled their vision. Not only has Lynch gone on record and said that he isn't very happy with how the show continued after this, but viewers thought that it kind of lost its focus. The desire of the network to keep ratings high and shareholders satisfied led directly to interference with an artist's work. And yeah, I know that compared to the political propaganda that's at risk of spreading, this kind of seems like a low-stakes example, but it just goes to show how much power these companies have over what they show, even for programs meant more for entertainment than actual news and facts. They have the power to contort shows to their will and forbid certain ideas from airing. Hey, speaking of, a slightly more subtle method of censorship is to create a list of banned words or ideas. When one has to retaliate against a work, they open themselves up to public outcry from those who had already seen it. So to prevent this, one could prevent a work from seeing the light of day in the first place.
As recounted in Censorship, the 16th century Pope Paul IV established the first official index of forbidden works called the Index Librorum Prohibitorum. This wasn't the first index. Several more local and specific lists have been drafted and enacted to oppose Reformation ideals, which often challenged religious authority. But the Index Librorum Prohibitorum was the first to essentially combine all of these together, and it was enforced on a wider scale. And for the next few hundred years, new terms, categories, and texts would be added to the index. Works of heretics like Machiavelli, political texts like Rousseau's The Social Contract, and Victor Hugo's Les Miserables. With over 4,000 books included, the index had a pretty considerable influence over what people had access to until Pope Paul VI, that's a different guy, changed it from being rigidly enforced to being more of a suggestion. This made more devout Catholics aware that some content in these works might not align with their beliefs and values, but they could still consume the work if they really pleased.
This type of censoring was echoed in 1950s America with the advent of McCarthyism.
Famous artists, authors, playwrights, and more were subjected to interrogation by the House Un-American Activities Committee to see if they were communists. But if those accused didn't admit to communist ties, they were just blacklisted from their industries. They would be put on a list of people who were forbidden from finding work. This is what happened to American playwright Arthur Miller, who wrote The Crucible about the witch hunting of McCarthyism. He was then, ironically, questioned by the House Un-American Activities Committee and charged with contempt of Congress for refusing to give the names of others.
The 1950s were not that long ago. And indexing still happens today, but it's typically led at a statewide or even county-wide level before it escalates, and it usually targets literature instead of visual art. Specific school districts may ban certain books for discussions of race, gender, or sexuality. A whole state might pass legislation facilitating the banning of certain books, and they might use the excuse of giving parents a right to their child's education. Then, perhaps, the national government might refer to these bannings as a hoax, while cutting oversight which allows censorship to happen at a much more rapid pace. And then the president, perhaps, could sign executive orders ending radical indoctrination and endorsing the silencing of minority voices. Anti-American ideologies. Written works are the primary target of indexing now, but that's not to say that certain topics explored in visual art haven't been restricted.
Artworks that make a statement on the Israel and Palestine conflict have had their exhibitions halted for the express reason of the political beliefs being shared by its creator. This website that I'm showing on screen right now is a really interesting tool to see if and where works have been censored on this basis. Even my home state of Michigan has seen incidents of it. Censorship doesn't escape any of us.
Art is being hidden from everyone in some form, but for most people it's being hidden through.
One of the more pertinent methods of censorship in modern times, and the last I'm going to discuss in this video, is the filtering of words and topics. Petley here examines how the internet went from being seen as a groundbreaking, libertarian future technology to being heavily controlled and contained by the federal government. Petley cites the example of the Children's Internet Protection Act, which requires schools and libraries to implement internet safety measures, namely the filtering and blocking of material deemed harmful to minors, if they wish to receive federal aid. This act, however, has been crudely enforced, according to Petley. Filters have been known to block content such as the Declaration of Independence, the works of Shakespeare, Sherlock Holmes, websites pertaining to breast cancer, anorexia, HIV and AIDS, and child labor. Now, of course, these works might contain content that's frightening for children, but it's also important that they learn about these topics, or at least have resources available if they're struggling with these kinds of situations. And remember, this applies to libraries as well. Those are public places that are not solely occupied by children, and they're places where trusted adult supervision is pretty expected. This form of censorship is also most obviously seen on social media sites, where a company's terms of service dictate what users are allowed to post and discuss. Usually, this system works fine and it doesn't notably inhibit the speech of artists, but there have been instances of overreach. Works featuring nude subjects have been a major issue for these sites because even if it's seen as artful or tasteful, they do also break their terms of service guidelines on nudity. Art that features the female form, especially nipples, have also been censored on these grounds, which can impact offending content just as much as it does educational content on breastfeeding or art from queer and feminist artists that want to destigmatize the body. The consequences of breaching these terms can be pretty dire for artists. Social networks are a great place to get eyes on your work, but sites are also free to ban your account, shadow ban your work, where users are rarely, if ever, shown your content, even if they're actively looking for it, and threaten your livelihood because outreach is crucial for artist success. Some artists might take to self-censorship where they prevent themselves from discussing certain things out of fear that they're going to break the TOS guidelines. TikTok has seen an enormous rise in creators referring to serious topics like suicide, rape, killing, or sexuality as sewer slide, grape, unaliving, and segs to avoid triggering detection of these often censored phrases. This shifting of language changes how people perceive these topics and limits how much users can actually say. It forces them to sanitize their stories and be less authentic. More widespread online censorship leaves consumers with a less diverse knowledge base, and it can create echo chambers where their pre existing beliefs are always reinforced. I find all of this genuinely upsetting. So, what do we do about it?
As you can probably gather by now, censorship is a widespread issue, and there's little that one person can do to really fix the problem, but there are things that we can do to help. Organizations exist that help to fight censorship in physical places like museums and galleries, as well as online spaces. The National Coalition Against Censorship works to uphold free expression, thought, and inquiry, with specifically artists and curators listed as those it serves. It provides resources for artists and activists like this list of artist rights, a toolkit for stage plays on college campuses in an increasingly hostile environment, and this manual for art freedom against censorship. Don't Delete Art is also a movement that fights against restriction of art on digital platforms for the reasons I mentioned earlier. If joining or supporting a whole organization seems daunting, there's also individual actions you can take too. Engage with artists' works. Online, this can involve sharing someone's work or liking it or giving it a like equivalent on whatever platform you're on. In real life, this means going to artist exhibitions, particularly of artists you feel like are more at risk of experiencing restriction or cancellation. See their art before it gets taken away, and then, if it happens, use that knowledge to publicly advocate for them. Advocate for artists you respect who have been banned or had their visibility limited. And for the artists watching this who worry about receiving this kind of treatment, you're not entirely powerless. Public pressure is a very effective tool in getting your work uncensored, so finding and utilizing any resource you can to get eyes on you is the way to go. The organizations I mentioned earlier are also ready and willing to help you should you find your work censored. Censorship is a widespread issue, but if we come together and we support artists, then we can weaken its power. At least just by a bit. Thank you.
There. Thanks for watching my video. I'm by no means a video essay professional, so I appreciate everyone putting up with my terrible line reading and my terrible editing. I especially hope my English professor liked it. But working on this project has been really fun, honestly, and it's made me think that this might be something that I do more often. So look out for that, I guess. Like and subscribe.